Sometimes a die in your campaign becomes infamous. Maybe it killed some players. Maybe it let the villain escape. Maybe it destroyed a magical item. In those cases, there's a story behind that die, and there's a reason to memorialize it. So today we're going to make a die monument, a Dastardly Die Monument, to memorialize a die that has an infamous legacy. Let's get started. So we're going to start out with one of these dice boxes. The ones that I use are a little bit bigger than the ones that you would get with like a set of Chessex dice, for instance. But you can still use that style die box as well. You're just not going to have as much room in there to make scenery and room for the dice itself. And I'll leave a link to where you can get them in the comments. So we're going to start off with a piece of foam. Now I use a piece of insulation foam here, but you can also use the Dollar Tree foam board. All you need to do is take the paper off of both sides and then glue layers of it on top of each other to make the same kind of shape. And we're going to start with hot gluing on that foam to the base of the dice box. And we're also going to put the cover back onto the dice box to make sure that that piece of foam is positioned correctly. Now once the piece of foam is dried well onto the base, we're going to use our hot glue gun. Now we're not going to use any glue out of this. We're not going to squeeze the trigger on it. We're only going to use the nozzle, which is super hot, so be careful. But we can use that nozzle to melt the foam into the shape that we want the final piece to be. And you want to make sure you do this in a well-ventilated area since you are melting that foam. But this is actually a really easy and fast way to make some really interesting textures onto the foam. As you melt it away, the foam becomes like a hard, crisp shell wherever it was melted. And it becomes very funky looking, but it looks like rock faces, very angular, and really visually very interesting. The goal here is to make sure that there's enough material removed for you to have the die sit in there properly without hitting the sides of the cover of the dice box. But this is really fun, and it actually makes for really great results. Here I'm trying to make sort of channels in what's going to be the cliff face, because those channels I'm going to actually put some ground cover in to make it look like there's growth, like plants and things in there. You can also hold the gun upside down. Sometimes that makes it a little easier to sculpt with, and also makes it, for me at least, easier to not hit the trigger. Here I'm test fitting a die to see if it fits in there well. This is not the die that I'm going to be using, but it's the same size. And it's pretty close, but it doesn't clear the sides of the foam, which means it won't clear the sides of the cover to the dice box. So I need to take out a little bit more material. And another test for the die, and this looks a lot better. This looks like it fits pretty well. Then it's on to making the rest of that piece of foam look less like foam. On the top, I like to make it all look kind of craggly and have some peaks. I generally leave the sides kind of untouched, as if this little piece of terrain was literally cut out of a rock face and put into this box. On the top here, you can do as much or as little as you like. It's really up to how you want to make it look. There's no right or wrongs, but generally I like to make the whole top look rugged and natural. That's looking pretty good. A little test fit just to make sure. Yep, fits pretty well. This is an optional step. I put masking tape around the dice base because I'm a sloppy painter. I just like to do this because then I don't have to worry about getting any paint in the base and then scraping it off later. So we're going to cover the entire thing in black acrylic paint, and you can be generous with this. The goal is to make sure that there's no pink foam showing. And once this is completely dry, we're going to dry brush all this rocky terrain with gray. So dry brushing, if you don't know what it is you put a little dab of paint on your paintbrush, stroke most of it off like I'm doing here on the paper towel, and then you gently brush it over the top of whatever surface you want to dry brush. And it adheres most to the areas that are up high, like ridges and stuff, and highlights them and makes them really jump out at you. It gives so much depth and character to anything that you dry brush. And you can do as much or little as this as you'd like. In fact, if you totally mess this up, you can just paint it black again and do it again. Here I'm adding some ground cover, and I'll add a link to where you can buy this from. But if you don't want to buy it, you can also use dirt from your yard. Just sift out the big stuff. I've done that in the past as well, and it comes out great. In fact, if you want to see me using dirt, you can check out the bonfire video, which is GameGearMaster number 7. There I use sifted dirt. And I'm using a mixture here of 50-50 water and PVA glue, you know, the basically Elmer's. In this case, it's Elmer's wood glue. I also put a few drops of dishwashing liquid in there. And what that does is it breaks the surface tension of this mixture so it seeps into all that ground cover. And here I'm putting it on the sides of the cliff walls because I want to make sure that there's also some there sticking on. And I'm just dabbing in some more of that 50-50 glue mixture with dishwashing liquid in it. And if you don't have an eyedropper, you can also just use like a safety pin needle. Basically, you dip the needle into this mixture, and then you'll get one drop on the needle, and you can kind of dab that over into your ground cover and just repeat that process until you have it all covered. The eyedropper is just a little faster. And here I'm doing the other side of the cliff face. And once you've got this all dripped on there, just wait until it's dry. Here I'm adding some highlights to the ground cover. Now, if you did it with dirt from your yard, what you want to do is you want to start with the olive green first, cover most of your ground cover with that, and then dry brush on a highlight of green, like I'm doing here. And it may be hard to see this on camera, but it actually does really make those grassy areas pop. These little trees that I have here, they were from a box of trees that I bought a long time ago. I have in the past used ground cover and stuff just from my yard. My only suggestion with that is if you do decide to do that, make sure you bring the stuff in and let it sit and completely dry and acclimate before you use it because it will change over time. But this ground cover is pretty cheap, and I mean, I'm using the same box that I've used for years. And I'll leave a link to that down in the description as well if you want to go that route. So this is an optional step. I like to make the die look like it's not been cared for and it's overgrown and kind of funky. So here I'm dry brushing on some olive green. And after this dry brushing, I'm going to add some glue to the paint, about 50-50 mixture of glue and paint. And then I will paint that on pretty generously around the bottom of the die. Also, what I'll do is I'm going to paint a little bit of it in long lines to simulate vines that are growing up the sides of the die. And before this paint is dry, I'm going to actually sprinkle more of the ground cover on there. Since now we have glue in there, it'll stick really well. And those parts that we painted that look like vines will now also have ground cover on them and look really great. And be generous when you sprinkle on your ground cover dirt. And once it's totally dry, you can gently remove it from your painting mount. And then it's time to put it into our monument. And you can see here I'm just positioned to make sure that it's still clearing the sides even with my ground cover under there, and it looks pretty good. So now I'm going to put a generous amount of hot glue on there because I want to make sure it goes through my ground cover onto the foam and also really holds that die in place well. And don't worry if you can see some of it after you put the die on there. We'll take care of that as well with some ground cover. And then we're going to position our die in there. And with that number 1 prominently showing, and just hold it in place. And while that hot glue is still wet, we're going to take some ground cover and make sure that any exposed parts of that hot glue will just be covered in ground cover now, so you won't see it. And you just take off your masking tape carefully. And put the cover back on. And we're done. Please like and subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified of new videos. As my thank you for your support, I've also put some free downloads for you at GameGearMaster.com, including a free PDF that lays out the details on the different Terraino building blocks. And I'll be posting more free stuff there, as well as Game Gear, D&D adventures, and other stuff you can buy to support these free videos. So thanks again.